All right, let's jump right in. Think back to a time when the cosmic board of power was, well, literally set in stone. You know the setup. The heavens had their strict hierarchy, the living earth had its ancient masters, and the 72 demonic crowns of hell knew exactly where they stood in the pecking order. Everything was neat, it was contractual, and above all, it was perfectly predictable. But then, something absolutely impossible happened. Ordinary mortals, everyday people, completely shattered this ancient balance. I'm your scholar for today, and in this explainer, we're going to dive deep into the chronicle of human raw power. We're going to look at exactly how humanity stepped onto this cosmic battlefield, not as pawns to be played, but as a completely new, wild, and unpredictable force. So here is our roadmap for today's historical treatise. We're going to cover 5 main chapters. We'll start with humanity's raw power awakening, move into some really gritty profiles of the people who held it, and then look at how they drew the boundary of consent. After that, we'll see how heaven and hell reacted to all this chaos, and finally wrap up with the foundation of the first human circle. Okay, kicking things off with Chapter 1, Humanity's Raw Power Awakens. To really grasp this, we have to start at the Siege of Grey Orchard. Now, Grey Orchard was a city with no holy relics and no natural defenses. It was completely vulnerable to the demonic forces testing its gates. And what happened there illustrates a massive paradigm shift in reality. Historically, power was super organized. It was hierarchical and deeply contractual. Demons demanded bargains, angels required absolute devotion. That was just how things worked. But this new human raw power, it arrived like broken lightning. It had no ancestry, it didn't fit onto any sacred ladder, and it entirely, stubbornly refused to honor those ancient pacts. It wasn't driven by spells, it was fueled entirely by extreme human emotion. We're talking profound grief, absolute terror, manic laughter, and just this outright refusal to surrender. So suddenly, the established powers of heaven and hell are looking at a force they literally cannot map or measure, and their entire board is permanently disrupted. Now, before the events at Grey Orchard, there was a man named Ilyan Marr. For a long time, our records show everyone just assumed Ilyan was this bizarre, singular anomaly. He had this raw force that could challenge spirits, but he didn't borrow their nature to do it. Angels and demons alike were scratching their heads, basically thinking, okay, he's just a strange exception to the rule. But then, as these human awakenings started popping up randomly across farms, in dark alleys, and out on battlefields, Ilyan looked at all these strangers and delivered this incredibly chilling insight. He said, I was not the beginning, I was the warning. He realized right then that he wasn't some unique, chosen weapon. He was just the first tiny crack in a door that had been sealed for millennia. Let's move right into Chapter 2, Profiles in Raw Power. Because to really understand this force, we need to look at the people themselves. We have to examine the incredibly gritty, everyday origins of these historic figures. Because, guys, these were not your mythical, shining, chosen heroes. They were ordinary people. And the emotional toll their powers demanded was absolutely brutal. Take Nadir Kel, for example. He was just a starving kitchen boy. He awakened his power by literally swallowing a demonic famine curse. He digested that curse into raw heat, risking lethal poisoning every single time he used it. Or Brann Ister, a lame cart driver who lifted a crushed stone arch just to save his daughter. His body was completely shattered by the weight, but his flesh actually learned to revise itself around his purpose. He started walking with ruined, rapidly healing bones, essentially turning excruciating pain into useful information rather than a command to stop. And then there's Mira, an apprentice who rubbed ground glass into her own eyes, just to break the illusions of a demonic physician. She gained this unflattered sight that cut straight through any magical disguise. So you can see,
Every single one of these abilities carried a massive, devastating personal cost.
But perhaps the most striking early awakening happened back at Grey Orchard with Sela Vorn. Sela was a completely ordinary woman who made her living repairing clay ovens and carrying flour. When demons managed to open the city gates from the inside by literally speaking through the mouths of terrified children, the defending soldiers were totally expected to just scatter in terror. But Sela didn't run. Instead, she covered her little brother's ears and shouted a single devastating word: no. It wasn't some ancient spell or a holy incantation. It was just hunger, anger, and deep exhaustion, all compressed into one incredibly dense human refusal. And that single word cracked the glass in the surrounding windows and physically threw the demon entirely out of those children.
Scholars later formally defined her ability as negative command, or the gate voice. And to give you an idea of how this worked in practice, later on, a demon disguised itself perfectly as Sela's dead mother and tried to trick her into inviting it inside her home. Sela didn't fight it with fire. She simply whispered that the demon clearly didn't know where the winter beans were hidden. That mundane little whisper instantly became an invisible, impenetrable wall. It's brilliant, right? It proved that raw power wasn't just about striking things with blunt force. It was about the deep emotional refusal to be measured, tricked, or manipulated by these ancient crowns. Sela's gate voice made demonic trespass visible, and by doing so, she single-handedly ruined about half of Hell's deceptive strategies, simply by denying them entry.
This flows perfectly into Chapter 3, drawing the boundary of consent. As you'll see, raw power wasn't just a weapon used against the darkness of hell. It was also a firm, absolutely necessary boundary set against the blinding, overwhelming light of heaven itself. We see this play out most clearly with Tomas Reed. There was an angelic rescue mission in a small village to drive out a demonic swarm. A full angelic choir descended to help, but their holy sound was so immense, so overpowering, that it literally paralyzed the entire village. The villagers' grief just paused, their anger froze in place, even their love had to wait for permission from the light. Now, the angels didn't intentionally mean to harm them, but they were treating the village like an unthinking instrument. That's when Tomas Reed, a 13-year-old shepherd who was bleeding from his ears from the sheer noise, stood up. He looked at the heavenly host and made this incredible demand: stop using us as your echo. And you know what? The impossible happened. The choir actually stopped. Through that action, Thomas fundamentally altered the politics of heaven. He established what we call the boundary of consent. He proved he could suspend external authority, whether it was angelic or demonic, even just for a heartbeat, to create a raw circle of personal choice. There's another great example later when angelic healers tried to cure a poisoned, raving soldier. Thomas held his boundary firm and prevented the angels from simply forcing their cure on the man. He made the holy light wait until the soldier explicitly asked for help. And this is a monumental philosophical shift. It proved that forced salvation is really just a cleaner, prettier form of possession. The takeaway here is absolutely crucial. Holy light must honor human agency, and it has to ask before it enters.
So, how did the cosmos handle this? Let's dive into Chapter 4. Heaven and Hell react. The ancient powers had to entirely rethink their strategies, and for the demonic crowns of hell, this was an absolute nightmare. The core of their frustration was something Ilyan Marr coined as the random law. He pointed out that human awakenings had literally zero pattern to them. There was no predictable trigger. A gentle coward could suddenly awaken with godlike power. A hardened murderer might awaken. A king sitting on a throne might get absolutely nothing, while his chambermaid became incredibly powerful. The demonic crowns hated this with a burning passion. Think about it. Their entire system relied on predictable weaknesses, ancient bloodlines, and legally binding contracts. A demon could spend 3 centuries meticulously planning to corrupt a prince, only to have their entire scheme blown up in an afternoon by an awakened laundress. They simply couldn't predict it, so Hell was forced to forge a completely new strategy.
And Hell's adaptation was honestly quite genius. They realized they couldn't create or predict these powers, so instead, they just waited. They stood beside the newly awakened, holding up flattering mirrors. They would sidle up to a new healer and whisper, this power means you, and you alone should decide who gets to live or die. They offered these compelling, ego-stroking explanations that completely corrupted the narrative of the human's gift. It turned into a massive war over interpretation. The core question became, what does your power mean, and who gets to tell you? Because human raw power wasn't inherently pure or holy. It was deeply messy, human, which meant it was capable of profound generosity for sure, but also immense, devastating cruelty.
Which brings us to our final chapter, Chapter 5, the first human circle. Humanity had to figure out how to survive these deceptive bargains and assert their true independence. To protect each other from Hell's flattering mirrors, and quite frankly, from Heaven's overreach, the awakened formed the first human circle. They intentionally gathered in a ruined amphitheater, making sure no single seat was elevated higher than another. Complete egalitarianism. And they set down some absolute non-negotiable rules. No claims of superiority, absolutely no selling each other out to kings, angels, or demons. And crucially, every single power had to be self-named. They understood that names given by others can become cages, and they totally refused to let scholars or angels define who they were. They used this space to train, to argue fiercely, and to hold each other accountable, all while being respectfully watched over by 9 holy lanterns, a silent historic alliance of mutual restraint.
But they didn't just have to manage the angels and demons. They had to answer to nature itself. The living earth was genuinely terrified of a humanity that might forget it belonged to the soil. So to take their permanent place in the circle, they had to pass strict training trials to prove they wouldn't just devour the world. Nadir Kel faced the trial of hunger. Surrounded by tempting, cursed roots, he only consumed the rot, leaving the healthy roots to grow. Brann Ister faced strength. Instead of violently ripping a fallen tree out of a blocked stream, he patiently waited for the nesting birds inside it to leave before he moved it. Sela faced voice, where she gently commanded water to flow only exactly where it was needed. And Mira faced sight, carefully marking only the infected trees for decay rather than burning down the whole grove. They proved undeniably that they could wield raw power in harmony with the natural world. Of course, the ultimate test of their independence didn't come peacefully. The 72nd Crown of Hell sent an infiltration unit, a calculator demon named Orith Lem, right into the middle of the amphitheater. Now, Orith Lem didn't fight with fire or claws, it fought with pure probability. It stood in the center of the circle and began speaking aloud every single person's deepest shame, their hidden fears, and mapping out their inevitable moral collapse. It told them exactly how their specific human flaws would lead them to ruin, using predictive math that was just devastatingly accurate. And the circle actually began to shake and fracture, because every single word the demon spoke was, based on the math, partly true. But then, a quiet woman named Etta, who had literally just awakened her power that very morning, stepped forward. She walked right up to Orith Lem, placed her hand firmly over the demon's mouth, and delivered this fundamental truth. She said, "You can read our wounds, but not what we will do with them." Her raw power became known as the unfinished variable. It was this incredible ability to instantly widen the human capacity to choose. A human's past might be totally written in stone, but standing near Etta, their future choices expanded infinitely. Because of that, Orith Lem's predictive calculations violently collapsed. The math was completely ruined. And with the demon's logic broken, the humans attacked as one unified force, tearing the demon apart and swallowing its escape curses so it couldn't report back. For the very first time in history, humanity wasn't just surviving the cosmic crossfire. They were actively fighting back as a unified, wounded, totally contradictory, and entirely free force. They didn't try to build a new throne above the angels or the demons, but they did force a really dangerous, brand new balance onto the world. And so, as we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with a massive, lingering question to ponder. Will humanity's unpredictable, unfinished freedom actually survive long-term against the eternal patience of heaven and hell? I hope this treatise has helped you understand exactly why human raw power changed the cosmic board forever. Keep questioning the balance, keep digging into the history, and thanks for exploring this with us today.